Hello, and welcome to this short lecture on Chapter 7. Chapter 7 covers the concepts of power, politics, and how we manage conflict in healthcare organizations. Specifically, we're going to talk about understanding what power is, how and where power exists in organizations, and how those power dynamics play out in healthcare organizations. We're also going to focus on the role of conflict management and how we manage conflict in both growing our influence and encouraging the growth in other individuals. We'll also discuss the important and necessary functions that are played by power and politics in an organization. So we all naturally, I think most of us realize the value of authority and power and influence, right? We want to be able to guide key choices. We want to be able to influence others to achieve value, to do great things. And so power is used in that way. We control, allocate, sometimes redistribute, move around resources in organizations. And we shape the culture. We set the norm for how people interact, whether we're competitive or we're collaborative, maybe a combination of the two. Power is defined, in our case, as control one group or individual has over another's behavior. This can include words with a negative connotation like coercion, the use of subtle influence dynamics to get what you want, to influence others' behavior. Power dynamics require two or more parties, right? We can't just influence air, we're influencing another group or individual. And there are three major sources of power that we discuss: structural, cultural, and knowledge-based power. So we'll discuss those in a few moments. Now, there's different power dynamics in healthcare organizations, right? We have the interaction between physicians and patients, providers and patients, with providers having more information, the ability to dictate decisions and drive patient care. We then have that physician-nurse dynamic that we see where physicians give physician orders, right? Doctors' orders, whereas nurses are executing. They're monitoring patients, they're administering medications. And then, of course, we have that physician-administrator dual hierarchy in an organization where we have physician leadership, and then we have healthcare administrators like ourselves in leadership roles. Now, we have to think about the political nature of power, the idea that this ability to control, a big part of that is managing influence, developing what we call coalitions or groups of folks gathered around a goal, showcasing leadership skills, and using so in a way that effectively motivates change. Now, the word politics generally implies some sort of hidden nature, some sort of underlying agenda, right? If someone's being political in the way that they answer a question, that response may not have much to do with the question as much as their general perception of themselves and the world around them. Now, the notion that organizations are coalitions, right? We are our own groups, but we're also part of this greater sphere of the health system, means that there's power dynamics both within an organization and for an organization with other organizations. And so we may think, for example, a CEO is not involved. He's not involved in the power dynamics within the organization, but he is brokering relationships outside the organization, maybe. We also have to consider that organizations in the health system, in the health care sector, and in public health tend to be very political because we've got different individuals with different roles and different needs and goals. And so that naturally creates a power struggle, a power dynamic. It's also important for us to realize that politics are often very inefficient. If we require individuals and groups to expend effort and time, valuable resources, gaining consensus and talking things through, that can take a lot of time. And so if we can do that efficiently, if we can make people feel included from the beginning, it's really important. And so we want to play a positive, critical role in organizations, focusing on sharing influence. Now, power, there's a power stratification that quite often can occur, how we perceive power and understand power through characteristics. And quite frankly, this can sometimes be things like demographic qualities. If someone is older than you or has many years experience in an organization, if the size of the organization involves a lot of middle level managers or higher level individuals, right? That can dictate the way power dynamics play out. So size of the organization is a factor. And then who actually controls financial resources and how we spend money. And I tease about this because my husband is a chief financial officer for a medical group. And quite often he'll say, oh, everybody's nice to me. Everybody liked me. That person was nice. So-and-so said they weren't nice, but they were nice to me. And I'm thinking, of course they're nice to you, honey. You control the money, right? So we have to think about that as a source of power. Now, sometimes we see abuse of power, and that's when power is used in ways that's not generally acceptable, either involving promoting self-interest or in a way that doesn't fit with the organization's best interest. It's punitive, it's not equitable. That's what we're concerned about. And there's two main reasons this occurs. One is someone wants to advance their own ends, their own personal agenda. The other side is maybe they want to advance the organizational ends, but they're willing to cheat a little bit or do things that are inappropriate and push their employees too hard in order to benefit the bottom line. And that's not okay. Now, abuse of power can happen in many different settings. And when it does, it normally results in a loss of trust by employees. And it also results in this uncertainty around the values of an organization, around goal attainment. Why are we even doing this work? And it disrupts the decision-making hierarchy on our viewpoint of one another. And so we don't ever want to allow that to happen. Instead, we want to foster trust, fairness, and transparency, and those are safeguards against power abuse. It's really hard to be a leader that abuses your power and is aggressive and inappropriate in a world where everyone else feels empowered to advocate for themselves and their colleagues, right? So, and there's policies and procedures in place to ensure equity. So when we have the right structure in place and the right organizational culture pre-built, it's hard for someone to come in and do that, ideally. Right? And so we want to develop those systems that emphasize personal integrity, that reward for positive behavior, that reward for true outcomes. We also want to realize that power is a source of conflict. Conflict can be associated with different perspectives. It can also happen if you're dependent on someone else to do their job and they have the power to limit the perception of your performance, right? The power to slow you down, the power to impact the work that you're doing. And so we want to encourage appropriate conflict management in those situations, appropriate communication so we can resolve conflict quickly. Now, there's all sorts of types of conflict. For example, we have task conflict, which is where we disagree about who should do what in what way. It's focused on the task. And this can involve trying to understand individual viewpoints to determine what the right course of action is, who should be involved, right? Strategy and task-related conflict. On the other side, we have relationship conflict. And for me, this is broader and runs more deeply. This is when you have a fundamental conflict with someone else's work style or their personality. Maybe you've worked with them for a while and they just do not bring out the best in you. You get upset or aggravated by that person easily. And so there's more task conflict now because you already are upset. You're already irritated. And so we want to resolve that. We want to create positive relationships and be able to appropriately identify that. Am I really upset with the decision this person made, or do I just not get along with that person? In which case, can I support the decision and maybe work on right sizing or correcting or coming back to that relationship and trying to remediate and build a new bond, a new opportunity to connect. So one of the things that we have to realize is that sometimes conflict comes from emotional moments. And sometimes it's not even based on the person standing in front of you. Maybe it's something going on in your personal life. But anytime we feel threatened, there might be a tendency to become rigid or inflexible. And so heightened emotions sometimes result in this conflict, like two rocks against one another, because we are struggling to see eye to eye, to generate new ideas. And when you become emotional, or when someone becomes emotional, that can quickly transition to other people, and other people can become upset. And we call that emotional contagion. And so when we have that emotional contagion, it's hard to make rational decisions. So sometimes we have to take a step back and realize that just because we're upset about a certain situation, maybe we don't engage certain folks. Maybe we go talk to HR or an employee assistance program, family, friends, but maybe we try to limit the amount of that outburst that's visible. And I'm not saying that you can't authentically be yourself. I'm saying that we don't want to create a situation where there's negativity or cliques or groups breaking off. We want to really limit that where we can. We want to be people of integrity who support one another. Now, there's a lot of common mistakes that happen when we think about and try to manage conflict. We may not have an effective plan for negotiation. We may not understand what the other person wants and needs. We may not have fully thought through possible offers and ideas for coming together. And quite often this happens where we can't quite think about what the other party needs. and we can't quite think about a common ground. And some of the ways that we get around that is sometimes we add things to the equation. We offer something a little different. We say, okay, I'll work on this project if you help me with this. We broaden the scope of the negotiation, and sometimes that can work really well. Now, some other common mistakes, not only do sometimes we not think about the other party and their needs, but sometimes we're thinking about the hit that we're taking, the loss that we're taking, and we're not thinking about collective gain. Or we are so focused on meeting everybody's needs at once that we're limiting the scope. Like, this doesn't work for everybody. Well, how could we move some pieces? Think outside the box, if you will, and think about other resources to meet every department's needs. We also sometimes believe the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is that one's beliefs influence another's behavior to support that belief. So sometimes we expect a negative outcome and we almost create it. We almost breathe it into life by assuming someone's negative intentions. And then that's not good. We should always assume positive intentions where we can. Now, for conflict management strategies, we have 3 broad strategies here. And these are frequently talked about. We have compromising, competing, and collaborating. Compromising is where we split in the middle. We split the pie in half. You get half the pie, I get half the pie. Competing is where we grab as much of the pie as we can. Collaborating is where we see if we can find 2 pies. Is there a way for us each to have what we need? Is there a way to have more collectively by sharing our intellectual or our logistical resources? Is there a way to grow that? Now, there's a lot of tactics that we can use to assist with negotiation and sharing of information. If we want to make sure that we're prepared to have a discussion and advocate for ourselves and our organization, we've got to gather more data. We have to ask the right questions to know what the other individual wants, what their needs are, not make assumptions. And we also have to be willing to find common ground and share goals, even if we aren't going to agree on everything. And these are the tactics I was referring to earlier related to negotiation. I like to add issues. So, okay, you want to work that shift and they really wanted to work that shift. Well, how about you get to work it this week, but they get to work it next week? And how about instead of you always getting Sunday off, they get a Sunday off? You add other components to start to negotiate across a broader field. And that way everybody gets a win, because it's not limited to one thing that we're fighting. Or we're not just fighting over pie. I brought fried chicken. Who gets the fried chicken? Sometimes we talk about non-specific compensation, where we are willing to compensate according to work effort, right? We're willing to create greater opportunities. In addition to adding issues, sometimes we unbundle issues. And we say, okay, I know you really wanted the director role over this department. So did they. You both interviewed. You were both successful. They haven't made a decision yet. Maybe management needs to break the department apart or restructure it in a way where you both could have a role unbundling. Now, that's not always a departmental unbundling, but sometimes we can unbundle issues that we're not getting along with to achieve agreement on sub-issues, right? And sometimes it's about packaging. Sometimes it's about unpackaging. Now, some of the other things we can do is be really clear, honest, and positive by making a strong opening offer, putting a good faith effort forward, and using objective criteria for deciding how we negotiate. Forming a group, getting folks to form an allegiance, if you will. Will you form an allegiance with me? But come with you to the discussion and push forward for a positive outcome. Plan for things you're willing to let go of. Plan for those concessions. But also be aware that if this conversation isn't successful, what is your BATNA? And BATNA is an old school management term for best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is the course of action that you take if you can't achieve an agreement. If we can't achieve an agreement on merging our hospital systems, what's the BATNA? Do I just walk away? Do I go talk with someone else? What is my backup plan? What is my next course of action? And so if you know that, you're able to better decide how you're going to perform. And it helps to think through what the other person's BATNA might be as well. What's their best alternative if they don't achieve an agreement with you? Are they going to escalate things? So I want you to consider a time when you used your power or influence positively, negatively. It could be someone else when they use their power, and what consequences you think exist for how we use our power. Specifically with abuse of power, the question for us as healthcare administrators is really, how do we structure an organization to prevent that in the future? How do we make our organization so foolproof, so positive, so inclusive that if someone came in with a bad attitude, that behavior wouldn't fit in here. You could not come in and be rude and irate to my nursing staff. That just would not be acceptable. So we have to think about how we can build those policies. So I want you to think about experiences in your career, in your life, in your family, and what you could do as an administrator to insulate your staff, your patients, your colleagues from those types of experiences. All right, well, thank you so much for taking time to listen to this. I hope it was helpful to hear my short overview, and I look forward to hearing any questions and hearing what you have to say in the discussion.